It's been more than 3 decades since the discovery of AIDS. The world has seen medical breakthroughs and a cultural shift in the perception of HIV and AIDS. But is the epidemic on the verge of spiraling out of control once again? I'm Mike Walter in Los Angeles. Let's take it full frame. Kenneth Cole runs a fashion empire, an empire that began 25 years ago from the back of a 40-foot trailer. Today, the popularity of Cole's line of men's and women's wear, shoes, handbags, and accessories spans the globe. Kenneth Cole Productions is one of the most revered fashion houses in the entire industry. Retail sales are upwards of $1.5 billion. Kenneth Cole remains the driving force behind the line. He serves as creative director for all aspects of the company, from clothing design to marketing. But among all of his professional success, Cole has found time to also serve as a dedicated leader in the fight against HIV and AIDS. He served on the board of directors of the American Foundation for AIDS Research, known as AMFAR, since 1987. He designs and donates most of AMFAR's public service campaigns. His innovative We All Have AIDS campaign brought global attention to the devastating stigma of living with AIDS. It featured celebrities, politicians, and scientists in a show of solidarity for people living with the disease. I sat down with Kenneth Cole in New York City to talk about his ongoing commitment to bringing awareness to the HIV and AIDS epidemic. Kenneth, we have an international audience, so they may not be familiar with your start, the production company start, the trailer story, getting the permit, how you launched all of this. But I think it speaks to who Kenneth Cole is. Can you tell our viewers what happened, how this all began, this journey?
Professionally, when I started my shoe company, I had almost 30 years ago. I had a little bit of time, limited resources, and I knew then, not much different than today, that most startup companies don't survive the first year in business. I think 60-70%, because they don't anticipate the amount of time it takes, and they run out of money. So I knew I needed to move quickly, and I needed a name for the company, because I needed to make stationery and business cards and establish myself with sourcing relationships. And so I used my own name, because in those days, the time frame of registering a made-up name could be years. So I went with my own name, and Kenneth Cole Inc. ran to Italy, found a shoe factory that needed business, knowing it was easier to get credit there than from an American bank that didn't. And I made a line of cool lady shoes, came back and needed to sell it. At the time, there were 2 alternatives in the shoe industry. One either took a room at the Hilton Hotel with about 1,100 other shoe companies, and the other alternative was take a big fancy showroom in a 2-block radius of the Hilton Hotel in New York. Clearly, I neither had the time or the money for that alternative. So on a whim, I called a friend who was in the trucking business, and I said, if I could figure out how to park one of your 40-foot trailers across the street from the Hilton Hotel in front of one of those fancy buildings, will you lend it to me? He said, sure, jerk, you can't park a bicycle for 10 minutes. Let alone a truck in New York for 4 days. So as he said, and I said, if I can figure it out, will you lend it to me? He says, if you can figure it out, I'll help you decorate it. So called the mayor's office. It was Mayor Koch at the time. Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, how does one get permission to park a 40-foot truck? And they said, they don't. This is New York. We give permission only in the case that you are a utility company servicing New York, the streets, AT&T, Con Ed, or if you're a production company shooting a film, because we were going through an I Love New York campaign in the 80s. So I said, thank you, Mr. Mayor, hung up, went to a stationery store, changed the name of the company from Kenneth Cole Inc. to Kenneth Cole Productions Inc., filed the permit the following morning for permission to shoot a full-length motion picture called The Birth of a Shoe Company. Opened for business on December 2nd. Had 2 New York policemen as my doormen, compliments of the fine mayor. And I had a director. Sometimes there was film in his camera, sometimes there wasn't. And I sold 40,000 pair of shoes in 2.5 days. And I tell the story because in business and in much of our lives, the best solution is rarely the most expensive. It's almost always the most creative. And I think that is also what has kind of helped Amphar over the years. We've gone about things differently than others traditionally have.
And that's why I wanted to ask that question, because I think that you approach things with a different form of thinking when you start a company like that and you see the results by just being creative and looking at an obstacle, not necessarily as an obstacle, but okay, how do I work my way around it? I mean, even your friend saying, if you can do this, I'll help you decorate because it's never going to happen. I mean, you didn't see this as something as an impediment. You were going to overcome it. The results were fantastic. So take that strategy, that nimbleness, and transfer it to philanthropy. I mean, how do you approach philanthropy given your start that way?
I don't think philanthropy is different than the world, than the traditional world and business in particular, because, we all have goals, objectives, and many of which are self-defined, and we build our own sense of constraints and barriers, and very often things that we perceive can't be done are things that just haven't been done, but doesn't mean they couldn't be done. And today everything is changing so fast, and the reality today is it's counterintuitive intellectually, because one thinks, one learns in business, you want to amortize an investment over a long period of time. The reality is you need to build a platform that enables, supports, promotes change, and the ability to respond to new information, new opportunities, new circumstances. And that's what the fashion business is in particular, and that maybe is why it is so inbred and often the way I think and what we do. But science is no different, and Amphar is no different. And when I was asked to join the board of Amphar, at one point I said, I'm really kind of a fashion guy, not really. And I'm more of a business person. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a public health person, but that's maybe why maybe you could bring a thought process and skill set that we don't have. So I joined the Amphar's board in 1987 after I ran my first AIDS awareness campaign. And then I was asked to become chairman about 10 years ago. So, and we have committed to go about what Amphar does. Amphar looks at what needs to happen and approaches it very creative, very innovatively, and that's where we've had a lot of the great breakthroughs over the years, and I think that's why Amphar has been so successful.
You were talking about how things change lightning speed nowadays. I mean, we've got social media, we've got, you mentioned Google, that wasn't there when you first started. So take me back in time to the 1980s, because things moved so slowly back then. And I think people today, young people growing up, don't realize what it was like back then, the panic, the fear. There weren't a lot of people joining this cause when you first got involved. Can you take us back in time to those early days?
So in the early days, there was this disease that was attacking mostly men in the United States, but not just in the United States. And it was frightening to people because it was happening quickly. It was ravaging these individuals at frightening pace. And we didn't understand it. We didn't know how it came about. And then we quickly, everybody felt vulnerable. And then pretty quickly, it became apparent that there were some common denominators, and that the people infected to a large degree were gay men and intravenous drug users. Later on, it was heterosexuals, and there was a higher predominance in Haiti and in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa and other places on the globe. So people felt a little less threatened unless you were part of one of those at-risk groups. So the stigma attached to people who were infected was overwhelming. And the stigma attached to people who were dying was frightening. And nobody believed that they were safe in the company of these individuals who were infected or even at risk of being infected, since the virus didn't always show itself immediately. Even the United States closed its borders quickly to people who were known to be infected, were not allowed to enter the country. So it was a scary time.
And then you had President Reagan. I mean, I've heard you in interviews say, it was 1987 when he first mentioned, AIDS, HIV. I mean, you had a president who wasn't even acknowledging it. A lot of people, here in New York, obviously in a metropolitan area, there's a chance that you would know someone who had become infected. But perhaps in Middle America, it was something remote. And so I want to talk to you about that. It's real for someone like yourself. It's remote for someone maybe in Middle America. And your ad campaigns made it real. I mean, we all have AIDS. I mean, some of the things you said at the time, probably provocative, but it was almost shaking the populace in a sense, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the notion is, how do you challenge the prevailing wisdom? How do you challenge people to rethink about what they presume to be the way things were supposed to be? And so we did a campaign, We All Have AIDS, and the notion was that everyone is affected. If anyone is infected, everyone is affected. And if not medically, then spiritually or socially or culturally. And then if ineffective AIDS exists anywhere, it exists everywhere, because we're living with the implications of that and the impact on our culture, on our healthcare system, on our economy, and so the reality is it was something that was very much embedded into the everyday dialogue, and everybody was trying to figure out how they felt about it. And you had this poor kid in the Midwest named Ryan White in those days who became infected, and he was totally ostracized from his community, and it became a big national discussion and debate. So interestingly, after we did the We All Have AIDS campaign, we also did a PR campaign attached to it, which was I Have AIDS. And the idea was we were going to ask all these well-known individuals, iconic individuals, to wear a shirt that says I have AIDS, allow themselves to be photographed, create a public discussion. Do they really have AIDS? And is that why now this is why they've done so much for so many years? Is it because it's been a personal tragedy or circumstance? And then a few days later, everybody appears together in one lens at one moment, that's with the note under the banner, We All Have AIDS. So, but no one wanted to go first with the I Have AIDS. And even these world celebrated, recognized individuals who have dedicated so much of their lives, efforts to this message, did not want to be the first ones to be prey to the tabloids. And so then someone said to me, well, would you do it? And I said, yeah, of course I'd do it. And I said, you know what, maybe I wouldn't. I've got 3 daughters who are in school. And is it fair to subject them to the discussion it might cause in their classrooms and amongst their friends? And maybe it's not. And then I realized if I wouldn't do it at that point, absent of an explanation, then it just speaks to the pervasiveness of to this day of it in our society.
You say to this day. So how far have we come on stigma?
I think we've come far, but as I often say at my other office, but we am far from where we need to be still. So and it's just not something people embrace and easily. So, because I guess of the social implications of how AIDS is contracted. But the reality today is we have come so far medically, and we know how to contain AIDS. From the earliest point, we knew how to prevent the spread of AIDS. We knew how to contain it. We didn't know how to cure it. Safe sex, clean needles. Okay, then we come to terms with the reality that that's not, you can only control that to a degree. And So AMFAR starts the first needle exchange program in the mid-'80s. And then I actually ran an ad also about that time with a picture of a condom with the message, shoes are the only thing we encourage you to wear. And it was illegal to advertise condoms in those days, because there was the presumption that it promoted promiscuity. So AMFAR broke through on that front, and I did my first ad with a condom, even though it was illegal. But what I had done was I airbrushed off all the words, so it was the iconic image of a condom.
As you look at the landscape over the time that you started to today, Rock Hudson, of course, one of the most famous people to announce that he had HIV, and then, of course, he dies. And then Magic Johnson comes out and makes this public declaration, but he's still alive today. And I want to talk to you about that, and you've talked about this as well, the managing the disease. Does it make it harder to get your message across because people kind of feel like, well, it's a chronic disease now, it's not what it once was? Or has the perception changed? I mean, does it make it tougher to kind of cut through the clutter, especially with so many messages out there?
It's hard. It's always been hard. And there is the notion that today you can live with AIDS, and it's not a crisis. It's chronic. It's not acute, but you can live with it indefinitely, and that's just not the case, and we don't know that to be the case. And people are still dying at unacceptable rates everywhere from AIDS. So how do you bring it to people's attention? How do you get people to understand the need to be tested, to know their status, know their circumstance, and under the appropriate circumstances, respond appropriately?
I just interviewed Andre Agassi out in Las Vegas not too long ago, and in his book he says to his coach, dreams are so damn tiring. And his coach says, but great things happen on the other side of tired. And I imagine along the way, you probably had some dreams. You've probably been tired. It's been a long, tough slog. Have there been rewards at the other end of tired?
I look back and I am really proud of the work AMFAR has done and the role that I've been allowed to play in the process. And there are times that I wake up and say, why am I doing this? And I have a day job, and I have to provide, for my family in different ways, and at the same time I have to look after these all these poorly dressed
guys like me,
poorly attired individuals all around the world, suffering in different ways. So I say in jest, but I have all these other needs that are pulling at me, and I have obviously the needs of the family, wanting to be a good father and a good husband and a good employer and an effective businessman that ultimately is the foundation that allows me to do everything else that I do. But somehow I've been able. AMFAR has. It's worked, and it's been rewarding. It's something I didn't study. I didn't really know about science. I didn't study public health, but I have always intuitively looked at things creatively and sought to find more interesting ways of addressing dilemmas, and I think that's helped here. But it is an eye that has seen these breakthroughs. It's the dedicated staff and scientists and members of our organization.
The fight against the global HIV and AIDS epidemic has spanned 33 years and affected nearly every country in the world. One man has been at the forefront of those efforts since the very beginning. We'll meet him here in Los Angeles in just a moment.